Okay, so you know how sometimes you really want to get to the good stuff in some document, but it just seems like there's so much to wade through.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like some of these standards documents are so long and complex, you can spend hours just trying to find what you need.
Right. And so what we do in these deep dives is we take those really important sources and we kind of distill them down for you. We go through them carefully and highlight the key insights so you don't have to.
Like a tailored session just for you, our listener. You tell us what you're interested in, and we do the legwork.
Exactly. And for this deep dive,
Yeah.
you sent us this BS ISO IE 42001.2023 document. It's the international standard for managing AI. Like you said, it's pretty dense.
It is, yeah. It's packed with a lot of valuable information, but it can be overwhelming if you're trying to digest it all at once.
And that's where we come in, right? So for this particular deep dive, we're going to focus specifically on Clause 7 support. We'll break it down section by section, just as it's laid out in the standard. Think of us as your instructors for this session.
I like that analogy. We're going to guide you through it step by step. And by the end, you'll have a really solid grasp of what Clause 7 is all about.
So let's dive right in. And the first section under Clause 7 is 7.1 resources.
Right. And this is a really fundamental section because it's all about what an organization needs to have in place, even before they start thinking about an AI management system, and certainly to actually make it work effectively over the long term.
That's like the foundation, right? You can't build a house without a solid foundation.
Exactly. And the core of this section is really this one sentence. The organization shall determine and provide the resources needed for the establishment, implementation, maintenance, and continual improvement of the AI management system.
That pretty much sums it up right there, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty comprehensive. It's not just about the initial setup. It's about the ongoing commitment to having those resources available.
Like you said, those resources are needed for everything from establishing the system to implementing it to maintaining it and then improving it over time. Continual improvement, right?
Absolutely. And there's a note here that actually points us to Annex A.4 and B.4 for more specific guidance on controlling and implementing AI resources.
So this is like additional resources that we can dig into if we want to go even deeper.
Yeah, exactly. We won't go into those in detail right now, but it's good to know that there's more granular guidance available in the standard itself.
But for now, I think it's important to just get the big picture of 7.1. It's about making sure that organizations think carefully about the resources they need for their AI systems and that they actually provide those resources.
Right. And remember, resources can be a lot of things. It's not just about money. It's about people. It's about technology. It's about data. It's about processes. It's about the whole infrastructure.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And, when we talk about resources, we also need to think about the people who are going to be using those resources.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the next section, 7.2, competence.
Okay, so competence. This is about making sure that the people involved in the AI management system have the right skills and knowledge.
Right. You need a competent team to build and manage a successful AI system. And the standard is very clear about this. It says the organization shall determine the necessary competence of persons doing work under its control that affects its AI performance.
So it's not just about having people with fancy titles. It's about making sure that they actually have the skills and knowledge they need to do the job.
Exactly. And this section goes beyond just identifying the necessary competence. It also requires the organization to take action to acquire that competence.
So if there are gaps in skills or knowledge, they need to do something about it.
Right, and that could involve providing training, offering professional development opportunities, or even hiring people with specific expertise.
So it's really a proactive approach to ensuring competence.
Absolutely. And then the standard also requires organizations to evaluate the effectiveness of the actions they've taken to acquire competence.
So they need to make sure that the training they've provided or the new hires they've made are actually making a difference.
Exactly. And they need to document all of this. The standard says appropriate documented information shall be available as evidence of competence.
So you need to be able to prove that your team has the necessary skills and knowledge.
Right. So think about this. You could have regular skills assessments within your team to identify any areas where people need additional training. You could also create communities of practice where people can share their knowledge and learn from each other.
And it's also a good idea to keep records of qualifications, training courses completed, and any other evidence of competence.
Exactly. So we've talked about resources and we've talked about competence, but there's another really important piece of the puzzle, and that's awareness.
Okay, so awareness. This is about making sure that everyone in the organization understands the AI management system and their role in it.
Exactly. Competence is about having the right skills, but awareness is about understanding the big picture. It's about knowing why your work is important and how it contributes to the overall success of the AI system.
It's like having a shared understanding of the goals and the processes right.
Absolutely. And the standard is very specific about what people need to be aware of.
Okay, so what are those key areas of awareness?
First, everyone needs to be aware of the AI policy, which is detailed in Section 5.2.
So they need to know what the organization's overall approach to AI is.
Right. Second, they need to understand their own contribution to the effectiveness of the AI management system, including the benefits of improved AI performance.
So they need to see how their individual work fits into the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And third, they need to be aware of the implications of not conforming with the AI management system requirements.
So they need to understand the risks and consequences of not following the rules.
Exactly. And this is all about fostering a culture of responsibility and accountability. Everyone needs to understand their role and the importance of doing things the right way.
So we've got the resources, the competence, and the awareness. What's next?
Well, now we need to think about how all of this information flows within the organization. And that brings us to 7.4, communication.
Ah, yes. Communication, the lifeblood of any organization.
Absolutely. And this section is all about establishing and maintaining effective communication channels for the AI management system, both internally and externally.
So it's about making sure that the right information gets to the right people at the right time.
Exactly. And the standard says that the organization shall determine these communications.
So they need to think carefully about what needs to be communicated, when it needs to be communicated, who needs to receive the information, and how it should be communicated.
Exactly. So, for example, they might need to establish regular team meetings to discuss progress on AI projects. They might need to create formal reports to keep stakeholders informed. Or they might need to develop a system for communicating critical alerts if something goes wrong.
So it's really a tailored approach to communication.
Yeah.
You need to choose the methods and channels that are most appropriate for your organization and your specific needs.
Absolutely. And it's not just about sending out information, it's also about listening and responding to feedback. It's about creating a two-way dialogue.
That's a really important point. Communication is not a one-way street. It's about engaging with people and making sure that your voices are heard.
Exactly. And when done well, communication can help to build trust and alignment within the organization. It can also help to mitigate risks and prevent problems before they occur.
Okay, so we've talked about resources, competence, awareness, and communication. Now let's move on to the final section of Clause 7, which is 7.5, documented information.
Okay, great. Now this is all about creating and maintaining records of everything related to the AI management system. It's about having a clear paper trail, or I guess these days it's more of a digital trail.
Right. We've got to keep up with the times. But seriously, documentation is really important. It provides evidence that you're doing things the right way. It also helps to ensure consistency and accountability.
Absolutely. And the first subsection here is 7.5.1 general. It says that the organization's AI management system shall include two types of documented information.
Okay, so what are those two types?
First, it has to include all the documented information that's required by the ISO standard itself.
So there are specific things that the standard says you have to document, like the AI policy, for example.
Right. And then second, it has to include any other documented information that the organization determines is necessary for the effectiveness of its own AI management system.
So there's some flexibility there.
Yeah.
Organizations can add to the required documentation if they think it will help them to operate more effectively.
Exactly. And there's a note here that points out that the extent of documented information can vary from one organization to another.
So a small startup might not need as much documentation as a large multinational corporation.
Right. It really depends on the size and complexity of the organization as well as the nature of its AI activities.
Okay, so we've talked about what needs to be documented. Now let's move on to 7.5.2, creating and updating documented information.
Right. So this section is all about the process of actually creating and maintaining these documents. And the standard says that the organization shall ensure several things when doing this.
Okay, let's hear it.
First, all documents need to be properly identified and described. So they should have a clear title, the date they were created, or last updated the author, and maybe a reference number.
That makes sense. You need to be able to easily find and identify the documents you're looking for.
Absolutely. And then second, the format of the documents needs to be appropriate. So the organization needs to consider things like the language, the software version if it's electronic, and any graphics or visual aids that might be helpful.
So the documents need to be clear and easy to understand.
Right. And then finally, all documented information needs to be reviewed and approved to make sure it's accurate and up to date.
That's important. You don't want to be using outdated or incorrect information.
Absolutely. And I think it's worth emphasizing that this whole process of creating and updating documentation should be done in a systematic and controlled way.
So you need to have clear procedures and responsibilities in place.
Exactly. Okay, so we've talked about creating and updating documentation. Now let's move on to the final subsection, which is 7.5.3, control of documented information.
This is about making sure that the documents are properly managed and protected.
Exactly. And the standard says that all documented information shall be controlled to ensure two main things.
Okay, what are those two things?
First, the information needs to be available and suitable for use where and when it's needed.
So if someone needs to access a particular document, they should be able to find it easily, and it should be in a format that they can use.
Right. And then second, the information needs to be adequately protected.
Protected from things like lost def damage, unauthorized access, or alteration.
Exactly. And the standard lists several specific activities that the organization should address to ensure this control.
Okay, what are some of those activities?
Well, they include things like distribution, access, retrieval, and use.
So you need to have procedures for who gets access to what documents and how they can use them.
Right. And then there's storage and preservation.
So you need to make sure that the documents are stored securely and that they're preserved in a way that ensures they'll be readable and usable in the future.
Exactly. And then there's control of changes, which often involves using a version control system.
So you can track changes to documents and make sure that everyone is working with the latest version.
Right. And finally, there's retention and disposition.
So you need to decide how long to keep different types of documents and what to do with them when they're no longer needed.
Exactly. And the standard also mentions that any documented information of external origin that's needed for the AI management system should also be identified and controlled.
So if you're using guidelines from a regulator or a manual from a software vendor, you need to treat those documents just like your own internal documents.
Absolutely. And the last note here is that the word access can mean different things. It could just mean permission to view a document, or it could also mean permission to modify it.
So the organization needs to define different levels of access based on roles and responsibilities.
Exactly. Okay, so that brings us to the end of Clause 7 support. We've covered a lot of ground here.
We've talked about resources, competence, awareness, communication, and documented information.
And as your instructors for this session, we hope that you now have a much better understanding of what Clause 7 is all about.
It's really the foundation of a strong AI management system. If you don't have these support functions in place, everything else is going to be much more difficult.
Absolutely. And we encourage you to think about which of these areas might be the most important for your own organization.
Where are your strengths and where are your weaknesses? What can you do to improve your support functions and make your AI management system even stronger?
And remember, this is just one part of the ISO standard. There's a lot more to explore, but we hope that this deep dive has given you a good starting point.
And maybe sparked some ideas for how you can improve your own AI practices. So keep learning, keep exploring, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible with AI.
And join us again next time for another deep dive into the world of AI.
See you then.